They thought they were teaching me a lesson by dragging the Pentagon to our dinner table, but when the investigator saw the addendum, he went pale and whispered, "I apologize. Do you actually hold this designation?" My mother was still smiling until two strangers entered and ordered my family out, because the interview had just been reclassified. They wanted to ruin my career, but the alarm they tripped might just destroy their own empire instead. My name is Luna Cruz, on the official payroll of the United States government. I am a 37-year-old mid-level linguistics analyst, currently assigned to a dull gray cubicle in an auxiliary office building in Alexandria, Virginia. My performance reviews describe me as competent but unimaginative, a woman who clocks in at 0800 hours and clocks out at 1700 hours with the regularity of a metronome. According to the personnel file that is accessible to the public or any standard background check, my most significant contribution to national security in the last 5 years was correcting the syntax on a translated trade agreement regarding grain exports from Eastern Europe. That is the life my family believes I live. It is the life my neighbors see. It is a carefully constructed architecture of mediocrity designed to make me invisible. The reality is that I hold a doctoral degree in computational linguistics, and I specialize in predictive syntax modeling for high-value threat assessment. I do not translate trade agreements. I build algorithms that listen to the static between the radio waves, searching for the linguistic fingerprints of people who plan to hurt this country. I work in a facility that does not technically exist on Google Maps, and the clearance level I hold requires me to undergo a polygraph examination every 6 months. My work is not boring. It is terrifying, exhausting, and vital. But the first rule of that work is silence. The second rule is that you must never, ever let your ego get in the way of the cover. I reminded myself of these rules as I turned my rental car into the long, winding driveway of the Everly Estate in Port Clayton, Georgia. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling neo-colonial mansion that screamed of old money and new insecurities. The humidity here was different than in DRC. It was thicker, heavier, carrying the scent of magnolia and salt from the Atlantic. This was the seat of the Everly Atlantic Freight Empire, the kingdom I had abdicated, and to them, I was not a prodigal daughter returning home. I was a defector who had failed to survive in the wild. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror before killing the engine. Dark circles under my eyes, hidden by concealer. A simple navy blazer over a white blouse. Unremarkable. Safe. I left my primary smartphone, the secure one, locked in a biometric safe back in my apartment in the district. The phone in my purse was a standard commercial model, populated with mundane text messages about grocery lists and dentist appointments, just in case anyone decided to snoop. When I walked through the double oak doors, the air conditioning hit me like a physical wall. The house smelled of lemon polish and judgment. "Luna," my mother's voice floated down from the grand staircase. Celeste Everly did not walk. She descended. She was wearing a silk dress that likely cost more than my first car, her hair coiffed into a helmet of blonde perfection. "You made it. We were beginning to worry you had been detained by whatever it is you do." "Hello, Mother," I said, allowing her to press her cheek against the air next to my ear. Traffic on 95 was brutal. "Always an excuse," she sighed, pulling back to inspect me. Her eyes scanned my outfit, finding it wanting. "Well, at least you are here. It is your father's 65th. After all, try to look a little less like a DMV employee." "Darling, the Kellers are coming for dinner." I stiffened. "The Kellers?" "Grant and Sloan," she said, waving a hand dismissively as she walked toward the drawing room. "And Grant's parents. It is a family affair. Please, Luna, just for tonight, try to fit in." I followed her, my stomach tightening. My father, Richard Everly II, was standing by the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch. He looked exactly as he had for the last 20 years, imposing, red-faced, and perpetually irritated. To him, I was the daughter who had rejected the family business to go play civil servant for a salary he considered pocket change. He hated that I had kept my ex-husband's surname, Cruz, after the divorce. He saw it as a final insult to the Everly legacy. Happy birthday, Dad, I said. He looked at me over the rim of his glass. You are late. The flight was delayed, I lied. Efficiency is not exactly the government's strong suit, is it? He grunted. Sloan has been here for 3 hours. She and Grant closed a deal with a logistics firm in Savannah this morning. A $10 million contract. That is efficiency. That is great for them, I said, keeping my voice neutral. It is great for the family. He corrected me sharply. Go get yourself a drink. You look tired. I suppose reading paperwork all day is exhausting in its own way. The dinner was an exercise in endurance. We sat at the long mahogany table. The distance between us measured not in feet, but in tax brackets. My sister, Sloan, sat across from me, radiating the glow of the chosen heir. She was sharp, beautiful, and ruthless in a way that made our father proud. Next to her was her husband, Grant Keller. Grant was the company's compliance and risk officer, a man who wore cufflinks shaped like nautical anchors and spoke exclusively in corporate buzzwords. For the first 30 minutes, they ignored me. They discussed shipping lanes, fuel surcharges, and the volatility of the Asian markets. I focused on cutting my steak into precise, half-inch squares. I was trained to endure interrogation techniques that involved sleep deprivation and sensory overload. I could handle a dinner conversation about freight tariffs. But silence, in my family, is often interpreted as weakness, and predators always go for the weak one. So, Luna, Grant said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. The shift in his tone was subtle, like the drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Sloan tells me you are still at the same desk at the DoD. No promotion this year. I looked up. I am happy where I am. Grant. Senior analyst. Right? He pressed, a smirk playing on his lips. It sounds impressive on LinkedIn, but I was looking at the federal pay scales the other day. With a doctorate, you are vastly underutilized. I mean, what do you actually do? Translate memos? Count verbs? The table went quiet. Richard stopped chewing. Celeste took a delicate sip of her wine, her eyes glittering with anticipation. They loved this. They loved seeing me reduced to a small, bureaucratic cog. I analyze data, I said simply. It is technical work. Technical, Richard snorted. You were the smartest girl in your class at the academy. You could have run our European division. Instead, you are pushing papers for a government that cannot even pave a road correctly. It is embarrassing. Luna. It is service, I said. It is hiding. Sloan interjected. Her voice was softer, but it carried a razor edge. Come on, Luna. We all know why you stay there. It is safe, no risks, no real responsibility. You just clock in, hide behind your clearance, and pretend you are important. I gripped my fork tighter beneath the table. If they knew. If they knew that 3 weeks ago, a report I authored had redirected a carrier strike group in the South Pacific. If they knew that the paperwork I pushed had identified an encryption key used by a cell operating out of Yemen, but I could not say a word. To defend myself would be to violate Title 18, Section 798 of the United States Code. I cannot discuss the details of my work, I said, reciting the standard line. You know that... Oh, please, Celeste laughed. It was a brittle, high-pitched sound. Do not be dramatic, darling. You are not James Bond. You are a linguist. You sit in a basement and read foreign newspapers. And that is the problem, Grant added, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table. In the private sector, specifically in risk management, we look for patterns, and your pattern, Luna, is odd. I met his gaze. Is that so? It is, Grant said. I mean, look at your lifestyle. You live in a 1-bedroom apartment. You drive a 5-year-old sedan, yet Mom says you have been traveling a lot lately. Conferences, you call them, but there is no record of you at the major linguistic symposiums. I checked. My heart rate did not change. I had trained for this. I attend internal workshops. They are not public. And the phone, Celeste chimed in. Seizing the momentum, she set her wine glass down with a sharp click. Last time you were here, I saw you with a second phone. A black one. You put it away the second I walked into the room. Why does a mid-level analyst need a burner phone? Luna. It is a work device. Mother. Is it? Celeste raised an eyebrow. Or are you in some kind of trouble? You know, people in Washington, they get compromised. Debts, illicit relationships, God knows what else. I am not in trouble, I said, my voice steady, though a cold fury was beginning to coil in my gut. Then why the secrecy? Richard demanded, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. We are your family. Do you think we are stupid? You come here, you sit at my table, you eat my food, and you act like you are better than us because you have some secret government job. But I think you are just ashamed. I think you are doing nothing of value. And you use national security as a shield to hide your mediocrity. Richard, calm down, Celeste said, though she looked delighted by his outburst. She turned to me, her expression shifting to one of mock concern. We are just worried. Luna, you are 37, you are single, you have no assets, you are secretive. To the outside world, to people like Grant who understand compliance, you look like a liability. A liability, I repeated. A security risk, Grant clarified. If I were vetting you for a position at Everly Atlantic, I would red flag your file immediately. Unexplained travel, discrepancies in your stated income versus your lifestyle, isolation from family. It fits the profile of someone who is hiding something illegal or someone who is unstable. I looked around the table. They were not just insulting me. They were building a narrative. They had discussed this before I arrived. This was an intervention, weaponized by their own ignorance. They wanted to break me. They wanted me to admit that my life was a failure, to cry, to beg for a job in the family firm so they could control me again. I am not unstable, I said quietly, and I am not hiding anything illegal. Then stop lying to us, Richard shouted. Tell us what you actually do. I cannot, because it is nothing. Sloane smirked. Admit it, Luna. It is nothing. I looked at Sloane. I looked at the diamond necklace resting against her throat. A stone bought with the profits of shipping containers that I knew for a fact were occasionally used to bypass sanctions, though my family likely turned a blind eye to the manifest details. I looked at Grant, whose risk management involved paying off port authorities in 3 different countries. I looked at my parents, who thought power was a seat at a charity gala. They were children playing with matches in a room full of gasoline, and they were mocking the firefighter for carrying a hose. I think we should move to dessert, Celeste said, sensing she had drawn enough blood for one course. I had the chef prepare that lemon tart you used to like, Luna, before you became so rigid. I did not eat the tart. I sat through the rest of the meal in silence, letting their conversation wash over me like sewage. They pivoted to talking about a new vacation home in the Hamptons and the upcoming election, spouting opinions they had purchased from cable news. When the dinner finally ended, I excused myself to the guest room, my old bedroom, preserved like a shrine to the girl I used to be. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for 4 hours. My hands were not shaking. They never shook. But the anger was a cold, hard knot in my chest. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark expanse of the estate. The moon was reflecting off the Atlantic in the distance. I checked my watch. It was 2100 hours. Downstairs, I could hear them laughing. They were celebrating their victory. They thought they had put me in my place. They thought they had exposed the sad, empty reality of Luna Cruz. Celeste's voice drifted up through the floorboards, muffled but distinct. She looked terrified when you mentioned the background check. Grant, I think we should push it, just to see. A little pressure, Grant's voice replied. See if she cracks. It is for her own good. I stepped away from the window. They had no idea. They thought they were dealing with a wayward daughter who needed a lesson in humility. They thought they could use the mechanics of bureaucracy, a world they thought they understood, because they paid lobbyists to squeeze me. I looked at the mirror above the dresser. The woman staring back was not the senior analyst they mocked. She was a ghost in the machine. She was the person who knew which generals were sleeping with their aides and which foreign ministers were moving money through shell companies. I reached into my bag and touched the cold metal casing of my phone. Not the one I showed them. The other one. I didn't turn it on. I didn't need to. Not yet. But as I listened to their laughter fade into the expensive silence of the house, a dark thought crystallized in my mind. They wanted to investigate me. They wanted to pull my file. They wanted to call the Pentagon and ask questions about Luna Cruz. I looked at my watch again. If they really touched my file, if they actually managed to trigger a security review with their petty, vindictive little games, they would not just find a mid-level analyst. They would trip a silent alarm on a server deep underground in Maryland. They thought they were playing a game of social chess. They didn't understand that they were about to walk onto a live firing range. If they really touched my file, they wouldn't understand what was about to come crashing down on their heads. And God help them, because I certainly wouldn't. To understand why 2 federal agents eventually walked into my father's dining room to evict my family from their own home. You have to rewind 14 days. You have to look at a timeline that I reconstructed later, piece by piece, from sworn affidavits, recovered emails, and the humiliated confessions of people who thought they were untouchable. It started, as most disasters in my family do, with a charity gala in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks before the birthday dinner, my mother, Celeste Everly, was holding court in the ballroom of the Willard Hotel. It was a fundraiser for historical preservation, the kind of event where the plates cost $5,000 and the conversation costs your soul. My mother loves these events. She treats them like Shark Tanks where she is the only one who knows how to swim. She was wearing emerald silk and standing near the open bar, surrounded by a small orbit of women who all shared the same plastic surgeon and the same anxieties about their children losing status. I was not there. Obviously, I was likely in a windowless room in Virginia, analyzing syntax patterns from a radio intercept in the Maghreb. But I know exactly what happened because the woman my mother was speaking to, a socialite named Patricia, who thrives on the misfortune of others, later provided a very colorful summary of the evening. Patricia had asked the one question my mother hates to answer. She asked what I was doing. Luna, my mother had said, her smile tight enough to snap a violin string. Oh, you know Luna. She is still with the Department of Defense. Very steady work. Very bureaucratic. Still, Patricia had asked, arching an eyebrow. My son just made partner at his firm in New York. I would have thought Luna would have moved on to a think tank or a consultancy by now. Government wages are so quaint. That was the spark. That single word, quaint, ignited the powder keg of my mother's insecurity. In Celeste Everly's world, your children are not people. They are accessories. And I was an accessory that was out of fashion. She did not want a daughter who was a mid-level analyst. She wanted a daughter who was a vice president of operations at Everly Atlantic Freight, someone she could show off, someone she could control, someone whose life looked good on a Christmas card. Later that evening, fueled by 3 glasses of vintage champagne and a bruised ego, Celeste cornered a man named Julian. Julian was a former legislative aide who had spun out of the Capitol into a lucrative career as a lobbyist. He was the kind of man who sold access and information like other people sold used cars. I need to know something. Julian, my mother said, pulling him into a quiet alcove near the cloakroom. Hypothetically speaking, if someone in a low-level government job, say, a security clearance holder, became a concern for their family, if the family felt they were being misled, or that the person was perhaps unstable, how would one trigger a review, a way to perhaps pause their career, force them to take a break? She did not say, get her fired. In her mind, she was not destroying me. She was saving me. She wanted to clip my wings so I would have no choice but to crawl back to the nest. Julian, eager to please a donor of my father's caliber, gave her the roadmap. He told her about the Insider Threat Program. He explained that the clearance process is based on trust and reliability. He told her that nothing terrifies the security adjudication facility more than an anonymous tip claiming a subject has undeclared foreign contacts or financial irregularities. You do not need proof, Celeste, he told her, swirling his drink. You just need to create a credible doubt. The bureaucracy does the rest. They freeze the clearance while they investigate. The subject gets suspended. It can take months, sometimes a year to clear up. Usually, people quit before it is over. Perfect, my mother whispered. The conspiracy deepened 3 days later at the Everly estate in Georgia. My sister Sloane and her husband Grant were over for Sunday brunch. This was the moment the plan moved from a drunken idea to a tactical operation. My mother pitched it to them over Eggs Benedict. She framed it as an intervention. She told them I was drifting, that I was secretive, that my low salary coupled with my solitary lifestyle was a recipe for disaster. She argued that if I lost my clearance, even temporarily, I would be destitute. I would have to come home. I would have to accept the job Richard had been offering me for a decade. It is for her own good, Celeste insisted. We are rescuing her from mediocrity. Sloane was hesitant at first. To her credit, my sister possesses a shred of conscience, though it is often buried under layers of sibling rivalry. It seems extreme, Mom, she said. Messing with a federal job, is that even legal? What if she gets in real trouble? It is just a background check. Sloane, Grant interjected. He wiped his mouth, his eyes lighting up with the arrogance of a man who believes he understands systems he has never actually worked within. Grant is a compliance officer in the private sector. He thinks the rules of corporate liability apply to national intelligence. He was wrong, but he sounded confident, and that was enough for Sloane. Grant is right, my mother said. If Luna has nothing to hide, then a review will find nothing. We are just accelerating the truth. But we need to make sure the complaint sounds professional, Grant advised, leaning in. You cannot just say she is annoying. You have to use the right buzzwords. Foreign influence, unexplained affluence, divided loyalties. That triggers the algorithms. And so, the trap was set. That Tuesday, my mother sat down at her personal laptop in her sunroom. She created a new email account using a generic name, citizen concerned at a provider that offered basic encryption. Thinking she was being incredibly clever, she did not realize that digital footprints are harder to scrub than red wine from a white carpet. She began to type. She did not want to sound like a mother. She wanted to sound like a worried colleague or a patriotic observer. But Celeste Everly cannot help being herself. As she fabricated the accusations, she wove in details that only someone who had known me since birth would know. She wrote that the subject, Luna Cruz, had attended a linguistics conference in Prague 4 years ago. That part was true. I had attended an academic symposium on Slavic syntax, but my mother embellished. She wrote that since that trip, the subject had displayed unusual sympathies toward Eastern European politics. She claimed I had been seen with unidentified foreign nationals. She wrote about my finances. She knew I donated money to a veterans support fund and a few animal shelters. In her letter, these became irregular outbound transfers to opaque organizations. She questioned how a government employee on a GS-12 salary could afford to live alone in DIC. Ignoring the fact that I lived in a rent-controlled apartment and drove a car that was barely holding together, the letter was a masterpiece of gaslighting. It painted a picture of a woman who was isolated, disgruntled, and potentially compromised. The subject maintains a secondary communication device, she typed, referencing the secure phone she had glimpsed in my purse once. This suggests a channel of communication outside of official oversight. She hit send. She sat back in her chair, satisfied. She believed she had just performed a tough love parenting maneuver. She thought she had pulled a lever that would simply pause my life long enough for her to step in and rearrange it. But the real tragedy and the dark comedy of it all was that she could not keep her mouth shut. The prompt for the investigation was supposed to be anonymous, but a secret in the Everly family is only valuable if you can trade it for social currency. 2 days after sending the email, my mother went to lunch at the country club with 2 other women from the board of the Garden Society. After 3 mimosas, the conversation turned to wayward children. One woman complained that her son was dating a cocktail waitress. Another lamented that her daughter had dropped out of law school to become a yoga instructor. Celeste could not resist. She had to win the competition of burdened mother. "Well," she said, leaning in, lowering her voice to a stage whisper that could be heard 3 tables away. "I finally had to take steps with Luna. I initiated a little administrative review, just to shake her up, to bring her back to reality." "You did what?" one of the women asked. "I pulled some strings in Washington," Celeste lied, inflating her own agency. "I am having her security clearance audited. It will force her to resign, of course, and then, when she comes back to Port Clayton, Richard and I will get her settled in the company." "It is drastic, I know, but sometimes you have to break a bone to reset it properly." She smiled, feeling powerful. She felt like a matriarch in a period drama, moving pawns on a chessboard. She did not know that the woman sitting across from her, a woman named Beverly, had a nephew who worked in human resources for a rival shipping logistics firm. She did not know that Beverly was listening with the intent to weaponize that gossip. She did not know that by bragging about pulling strings, she was effectively admitting to a federal crime, making false statements to a government agency in front of witnesses. And she certainly did not know that the administrative review she thought she had ordered was not going to be processed by a low-level clerk, because of who I actually am, because of the specific, highly classified code word attached to my personnel file. Her anonymous tip did not go to a standard adjudication center. It did not get filtered into the pile of routine background checks. When that email hit the server, it bypassed the normal queues. It triggered a red alert on a system that is monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was flagged as a potential insider threat level 1, concerning a high-value asset. My mother thought she was calling the principal's office to report a truant student. Instead, she had just dialed 911 and reported a bomb threat. Back in D.C., while my mother was congratulating herself on her cleverness, I was sitting in a secure briefing room, watching a live feed of a drone operation. I had no idea that 400 miles away, a digital torpedo had just been launched at my career. I had no idea that my own mother had signed the launch order, and I had no idea that my brother-in-law, Grant, the compliance expert, had effectively handed her the launch codes by coaching her on exactly which lies would cause the most damage. They went to bed that night thinking they had won. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about family loyalty. They were about to learn a very different lesson about national security. As the sun set over the Port Clayton harbor, casting long shadows over the Everly mansion, the wheels of the United States government began to turn. They are slow wheels, usually, but when you grease them with the kind of keywords my mother had used, foreign contact, compromise, financial leverage, they spin with terrifying speed. Celeste Everly slept soundly, dreaming of the day I would be sitting in the office next to her, humbled and grateful. She did not hear the sound of the storm gathering. She did not know that she had just invited the wolf into her home, and this time, the wolf was wearing a badge and carrying a federal warrant. The executioner arrived at exactly 9 in the morning, driving a charcoal gray Ford Taurus that had clearly seen better days. I was sitting on the patio drinking black coffee, watching the fog burn off the Georgia coastline, when the tires crunched against the gravel of the driveway. My father, Richard, was already at the front door before the engine cut out. He had been pacing the foyer since dawn, vibrating with the kind of excitement usually reserved for launching a new shipping vessel. To him, this wasn't a federal inquiry. It was the main event of his birthday weekend. I stayed seated. I took a slow sip of coffee. I checked my pulse. 60 beats per minute. Steady. The man who stepped out of the car looked like every background investigator I had ever met. He was in his late 40s, wearing a suit that was one size too large and a tie that was offensively beige. He carried a thick accordion folder under his arm and had the weary, cynical posture of a man who spends his life asking people why they forgot to list a parking ticket from 2012 on a federal form. His name, as he announced to the room 5 minutes later, was Special Agent Daniel Cross. "I am here to conduct a subject interview regarding Ms. Luna Cruz," Cross said. standing in the center of the grand foyer. He looked around at the opulent surroundings, the crystal chandelier, the oil paintings of ships, the marble floors with a flat, unimpressed gaze. "I require a private room to speak with the subject." "Nonsense," Richard boomed. He walked over and clapped a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a vice. "We are an open book here. Agent Cross, we are a family. Anything you have to ask my daughter, you can ask in front of us. We have nothing to hide. Right, Luna." Cross frowned. "Sir, standard protocol dictates privacy. The nature of these questions can be sensitive." "This is my house," Richard said, his voice dropping an octave. "And I'm telling you that if you want to talk to her on my property, you will do it where I say. We will use the dining room." I saw Cross calculate the variables. He could push back, reschedule, and force me to come to a field office in Atlanta, but that meant paperwork, that meant delays, and judging by the dark circles under his eyes, Agent Cross just wanted to get this over with so he could drive back to wherever he came from. "Fine," Cross said, adjusting his glasses, "but I will remind you that this is an official federal proceeding. Interferences will not be tolerated." We moved to the dining room. It felt less like an interview and more like a tribunal. Richard took the head of the table. Celeste sat to his right, her posture rigid, her face composed into a mask of tragic concern. Sloane and Grant sat opposite me. Sloane looked nauseous, picking at her cuticles, but Grant was leaning back in his chair with a smug expression, looking like a man who had already read the script and knew the ending. I sat alone on one side of the long mahogany table. Cross sat across from me. He opened the thick file folder and spread out a notepad and a digital recorder. "State your full name for the record," Cross said, pressing the record button. "Luna Maria Cruz. Current position: Senior Linguistics Analyst, Department of Defense." Cross nodded, not looking up. He was following a script. "Ms. Cruz, this interview is being conducted to resolve certain adjudicative guidelines that have been flagged in your file. Specifically, we are looking at Guideline B, Foreign Influence, Guideline E, Personal Conduct, and Guideline F, Financial Considerations." I heard Celeste inhale sharply. She reached out and squeezed Richard's hand. It was a performance. She was acting shocked by the very accusations she had typed. "I understand," I said. "We have received information suggesting you may have unreported contacts with foreign nationals," Cross said. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Have you, in the past 7 years, had any close and continuing contact with foreign nationals that you have failed to report to your facility security officer?" "No," I said. "Did you attend a conference in the Czech Republic 4 years ago?" "Yes, the International Symposium on Slavic Morphology." "Did you meet with individuals outside the scope of the conference agenda?" "No." "Are you sure?" Cross pressed, tapping his pen on the table. "We have reports that you were seen in private conversation with representatives from non-NATO-aligned entities. I attended the scheduled mixers," I replied, my voice flat. "I spoke with academics. All interactions were reported on my SF-86 form, dated October 2021, Grant scoffed. It was a soft sound, but in the quiet room, it was loud. Cross flicked his eyes toward Grant, but didn't say anything. "Let us talk about your finances," Cross said, flipping a page. "You live in Washington, D.C., a high cost of living area. Your salary is a grade 12 equivalent. Yet, we have reports of unexplained expenditures. Can you explain your source of income?" "My income is derived solely from my salary as a government employee." I said, "Then how do you explain the trips?" Celeste interrupted. She couldn't help herself. "Agent Cross, ask her about the trips. She disappears for weeks. She says it is work, but she comes back with no tan, no souvenirs, and refuses to say where she has been. Who pays for that?" Cross stopped writing. He looked at Celeste. "Mrs. Everly, please." "I am just trying to help," Celeste said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "We are worried she is involved in something. Maybe she is in debt. Maybe she is selling something she shouldn't." "Mother," I said. It was a warning. "Answer the question." "Ms. Cruz," Cross said, bringing the focus back to me. "Do you have unreported sources of income?" "No." "Do you have a second job?" "No." "Then can you explain the nature of your travel?" "Official business," I said. "Travel orders are on file with my agency." "Which agency?" Cross asked. "The file says DOD. That is broad." "Which specific agency or activity?" This was the trap. My family leaned in. This was what they wanted. They wanted me to say I worked for some obscure, boring logistics office so they could laugh. Or they wanted me to admit I couldn't say, so they could accuse me of lying. "I am a senior linguistics analyst," I repeated. "My chain of command is listed in the personnel file you have in front of you." "It is vague," Cross muttered, looking at the papers. "It just lists a routing code. Usually, there is a supervisor's name, a unit designation. It is a standard entry for my classification," I said. "See," Richard said, slamming his hand on the table again. "She is lying, standard entry. I have been contracting with the government for 30 years. There is always a unit designation." "She is hiding something. Agent, she is ashamed of it." "I am not ashamed," I said, looking my father in the eye. "Then tell us," Sloane cried out. She looked torn, her eyes wet. "Luna, just tell them. Stop playing this game. If you are in trouble, Dad can fix it. But you have to stop lying." "I am not lying, Sloane." "Ms. Cruz," Cross said, his voice hardening. He was getting annoyed by the family drama, but he was also getting suspicious of me. My answers were too rehearsed. I was too calm. "The ambiguity of your employment record combined with these adverse reports is significant. If you cannot provide a verifiable supervisor or a specific office location, I will have to recommend a suspension of your clearance pending a full field investigation. That means you lose your job today." The room went silent. Celeste smiled. It was a small, triumphant thing. She had won. She had forced the system to break me. "I understand the procedure. Agent Cross," I said. "But I believe you have not reviewed the entire file." Cross frowned. "I have read every page of this packet. Ms. Cruz?" "Check the addendum," I said softly. "The back flap. There should be a sealed envelope or a separate sheet with a red border. It is often missed if the file was printed at a low-level adjudication facility." Cross looked at me with skepticism. "There is no addendum in a standard field interview packet." "Please check," I said. He sighed, an exaggerated exhalation of air that signaled he was humoring a desperate woman. He flipped past the financial records. He flipped past the foreign travel logs. He reached the back cardboard of the folder. There, tucked into a pocket I knew would be there, was a single sheet of paper. It was distinct. It wasn't white. It was a pale, creamy yellow, a specific cardstock used to prevent photocopying. It had a thick red band running diagonally across it. Cross pulled it out. "What is that?" Grant asked, craning his neck. A reprimand." Cross didn't answer. He adjusted his glasses. He read the header. I watched his face. I watched the boredom evaporate. I watched the irritation drain away, replaced by a sudden, stark pallor. His eyes widened behind the lenses. He read the first line, then he stopped. He looked up at me, then back down at the paper, as if checking to see if the ink was hallucinated. He swallowed. I saw his Adam's apple bob. He read the code. It wasn't a long code. It was a sequence of 5 alphanumeric characters followed by a project name that doesn't exist in any unclassified database. It was a designation that authorized the bearer to bypass standard security checkpoints at the Pentagon. It was a designation that meant I didn't report to a unit commander. I reported to a directorate that briefed the president's daily briefing staff. Cross's hands, which had been steady a moment ago, gave a microscopic tremor. He realized where he was. He realized he was sitting in a dining room in Georgia, treating a level 1 asset like a delinquent clerk. He realized he had just demanded the operational details of a ghost. Cross started, but his voice failed him. He cleared his throat. He stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the parquet floor. "What is it?" Celeste asked, her smile faltering. "What does it say? Did she fail?" Cross ignored her. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on me, and for the first time, there was fear in them, not the fear of a man in danger, but the fear of a bureaucrat who realizes he has just accidentally walked onto a live minefield. "Ms. Cruz," he said. His tone had changed completely. It was formal, stiff, and terrifyingly polite. "I need to verify this designation, immediately." "Of course," I said calmly. "You have got to be kidding me." Richard barked. "Sit down. Agent, finish the interview. What is on that paper?" "Sir, be quiet," Cross snapped. He didn't shout, but the command was absolute. He turned to me. "I need to make a secure call. I need to step outside, now." "You can use the study," I suggested. "No," Cross said, clutching the yellow paper to his chest like it was a holy relic. "I need to use my vehicle, my secure line." He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over my family with a look that was no longer dismissive, but wary. "Nobody leaves this room. Do you understand? Nobody touches a phone. Nobody leaves. You cannot give us orders." Grant stood up, his face red. "I know the law. This is unlawful detention." Cross whipped around. "Sit down, sir, or I will have you detained by the local field office for interference with a national security investigation. And trust me, you do not want to be on the receiving end of the call I am about to make." Grant sat down. He looked stunned. "Ms. Cruz?" Cross said to me, and he actually nodded a deferential, respectful nod. "I will return in 5 minutes. Please ensure they stay put." "I will," I said. Cross turned and walked out of the dining room. He didn't walk with the tired shuffle he had arrived with. He walked with the brisk, panicked stride of a man who needed to get to a phone before the sky fell down. The front door opened and closed. Silence descended on the dining room. It was thick and heavy. Celeste looked at the empty doorway, then at me. Her smile was gone, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She didn't understand the language of government, but she understood the language of power, and she had just seen the power dynamic in the room flip 180 degrees in 10 seconds. "What was that?" Sloane whispered. "Luna, what did you show him?" I picked up my coffee cup. It was cold now, but I drank it anyway. I looked at my mother. "You wanted an investigation, Mother," I said softly. "You wanted to know who I really am." Celeste laughed, but it was a nervous, jagged sound. "Oh, stop it. You probably forged a document. That is it, isn't it? You are going to be in so much trouble when he comes back." "We will see," I said. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:20 in the morning. Cross would be on the phone with the watch officer at the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. He would read the code. The watch officer would likely tell him to hold the line while they patched him through to a very specific office in Arlington. Then, the panic would really start. My mother was still smiling, trying to maintain the illusion that she was in control, that this was all just a silly misunderstanding that would end with me humiliated and begging for forgiveness. She had no idea that the man in the driveway wasn't calling for backup to arrest me. He was calling to ask for instructions on how to apologize to me. But more importantly, he was asking why a clearance review had been triggered on a person whose identity was supposed to be protected by the highest levels of classification. The dominoes were clicking. I could almost hear them falling, one by one, all the way back to Washington. "I give him 10 minutes, Richard grumbled, pouring himself more water. "He is probably calling his supervisor to get authorization to arrest you." "Maybe," I said. I waited. The silence stretched. And for the first time in my life, sitting at that table, I wasn't the one who was afraid. The silence in the dining room lasted exactly 14 minutes. I counted them. I counted the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and I counted the number of times my brother-in-law, Grant, tapped his finger against the mahogany table. My family sat in a suspended state of irritation, convinced that Agent Cross was outside fumbling through a bureaucratic apology. They believed he was on the phone with a supervisor who was currently explaining to him that Richard Everly was a man of influence and that this harassment needed to end. They were wrong. When the front door finally opened, it did not sound like one man returning. It sounded like an occupation. Heavy footsteps echoed on the marble of the foyer, not the scuff of dress shoes, but the solid, rhythmic thud of military-grade soles and the sharp click of heels that moved with predatory purpose. "What on earth?" my mother muttered, straightening her pearls. "Did he bring the police?" Richard stood up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "This is ridiculous. I am going to throw him out myself." He marched toward the dining room doors just as they swung open. But it wasn't Agent Cross who walked through them first. It was a woman I had not seen in person for 3 years, though I had read her daily briefings every morning at 0600 hours. Deputy Director Lena Marquez. She was a woman of small stature but immense gravity, wearing a charcoal pantsuit that cost more than my father's car and carrying a leather portfolio that contained secrets capable of toppling regimes. Her hair was pulled back in a severe silver-streaked bun, and her eyes were like cold, polished flint. Behind her stood Colonel Aaron Pike. He was in full-service dress, the rows of ribbons on his chest testifying to conflicts my family had only watched on the news. Pike was the kind of man who filled a room simply by existing in it. He was not smiling, and behind them both, looking pale and significantly smaller than he had 20 minutes ago, was Agent Cross. My father stopped dead in his tracks. "Who are you people? You cannot just barge into a private residence." Deputy Director Marquez did not look at him. She looked directly at me. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a greeting. She simply nodded, a single, sharp dip of her chin. "Status check? Cruise?" she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. "Secure. Director," I replied, standing up. "No electronic transmissions since the interview commenced. No unauthorized departures." "Good." Marquez turned to the room at large. "I am Deputy Director Marquez with the National Intelligence Directorate. This is Colonel Pike from Defense Counterintelligence. As of 2 minutes ago, this environment has been designated a temporary sensitive compartmented information facility. The parameters of this interview have been reclassified." "Reclassified?" Grant sputtered, standing up to join my father. "What does that mean? Who gave you the right?" "It means," Colonel Pike rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly, "that everyone who does not hold a top-secret clearance with sensitive compartmented information access needs to vacate this room immediately." "This is my house," Richard roared. He pointed a shaking finger at Marquez. "I do not care who you are. You do not walk into the home of Richard Everly and start giving orders. Get out, or I'm calling the sheriff." Marquez turned her head slowly to look at my father. It was the look a scientist might give a bacteria sample that was behaving unexpectedly. "Mr. Everly," she said calmly, "this is no longer a family matter. It is a matter of national security. You have invited the federal government into your home to investigate a security concern. We are here to finish that investigation. If you attempt to contact local law enforcement, or if you obstruct this process in any way, Colonel Pike will take you into custody under Title 18 of the United States Code." "Custody," Celeste gasped. She had gone very pale. "Richard, what are they talking about?" "They are bluffing," Richard said, though his voice wavered. "This is America. You cannot just hijack my dining room." Pike stepped forward. He didn't touch his weapon, but the shift in his stance was a clear warning. "Sir, I advise you to step out of the room. Now, take your family to the living room. Close the door. Do not use your phones. Do not leave the premises." The air in the room seemed to vanish. My family looked from Pike to Marquez, then to me. They were waiting for me to crack. They were waiting for me to tell them this was a joke, or a mistake, or a role-playing exercise. I stood perfectly still, my face a mask of professional detachment. Inside, however, my mind was racing at 100 miles an hour. If Marquez and Pike were here physically here, not just on a secure line, It meant the situation had escalated beyond a simple flag. It meant the concern my mother had submitted hadn't just pinged a server. It had triggered a containment protocol. They weren't just here to clear my name. They were here to assess if my cover had been blown so badly that the operation I was running needed to be burned to the ground. Luna. Sloane's voice was small, trembling. She looked at the colonel, then at me. Luna, what is happening? Go to the living room, Sloane, I said. But why are they here for you? Go? My mother stood up. She looked unsteady on her feet. For the first time in my life, I saw the cracks in her armor. She looked at the woman in the expensive suit, then at the colonel, and finally at her daughter, the mid-level analyst. What do you actually do? She whispered. The question hung in the air. Stripped of its usual mockery, it was raw fear. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, and then tried to destroy me because I wasn't shiny enough for her gala photos. I cannot say, I replied. Out, Pike ordered. He gestured toward the double doors. It was a slow, painful procession. Richard went first, looking like a king who had been deposed. Grant followed, his corporate arrogance completely evaporated, looking terrified of the colonel. Sloane helped our mother, who looked back at me one last time before the heavy oak doors clicked shut. The sound of the latch engaging was the loudest noise I had ever heard. The moment they were gone, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The tension didn't leave, but it changed flavor. It went from the chaotic, emotional tension of a domestic dispute to the cold, clinical tension of a tactical debrief. Marquez dropped her portfolio on the table, right on top of the placemat where my mother had been eating a scone. Sit down. Cruz, she said. I sat. Pike remained standing by the door, his back to the wood, ensuring no one from the Everly clan decided to eavesdrop. Agent Cross sat in the chair next to me, looking like he wanted to crawl under the table. Report, Marquez said. The subjects initiated a hostile inquiry based on fabricated intelligence, I said, slipping automatically into the language of the office. The primary instigator appears to be Celeste Everly, motivated by a desire to leverage financial dependence. The allegations were designed to trigger a suspension of clearance. We know that part, Marquez said, pulling a tablet from her portfolio. We tracked the IP address of the complaint to this residence. We know it was a domestic sabotage attempt. What we need to know is the blast radius. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. Luna, she said, using my first name, which was a sign of how serious this was. When the flag went up, it hit the G system. Cross here. She gestured to the sweating agent. Pulled the physical file before the digital lock engaged. He saw the addendum. I looked at Cross. You read the project summary. No, Cross said quickly. He looked at me with a mixture of awe and apology. I didn't have the clearance to open the seal. I just saw the cover sheet. I saw the code. Project Obsidian. And I saw the restriction level, presidential access only. He swallowed hard. I realized I was asking a Project Obsidian asset about a $500 discrepancy in a travel voucher. I knew I had to call it in. He made the right call, Pike grunted from the door. If he had proceeded with a standard field check, he would have started asking your neighbors about cover activities. He would have blown the whole network. Marquez tapped the table. Here is the problem. Cruz, your mother didn't just write a letter saying you were lazy. She used keywords, specific ones. Foreign contacts, unverified income, hidden devices. She constructed a narrative that mirrors actual espionage indicators. She had help, I said. My brother-in-law, he works in compliance. He knows the buzzwords. That explains the precision, Marquez noted. But here's the nightmare scenario. To get those details, she had to be watching you. She mentioned your travel patterns. She mentioned the secondary phone. If she knows you have a secondary phone, and she has been talking about it. She has been talking, I admitted. The weight of it settled on my shoulders. She bragged about the investigation at her club. She told her friends she was pulling strings. Marquez closed her eyes for a brief second. A look of pained frustration crossed her face. "Civilians," she whispered. "They treat information like gossip." She opened her eyes. If she told her friends at the club, and those friends told their husbands, we have to assume the narrative that Luna Cruz is a government employee with suspicious secrets is now circulating in the Diaz social circuit. That makes you a target. Foreign intelligence services recruit from those circles. Luna, they listen to that gossip. "I know," I said. "We have to assess the damage," Marquez said. "We need to know exactly who she told, what she told them, and who helped her construct that letter. We need to know if she showed that letter to anyone else before she sent it. If a copy of a letter accusing a high-level asset of treason is floating around on a civilian server, it becomes blackmail material," Pike finished. "Or a recruitment hook," Marquez added. She looked at me. "This isn't an interview anymore, Luna. This is a damage control operation. We are going to turn this house upside down. We are going to audit their devices. We are going to interview them, and not politely." I looked at the closed doors. I imagined my family in the living room. My father, fuming about his property rights. My mother, probably crying about how unfair this all was. They thought they were in a legal dispute. They didn't realize they were about to undergo a forensic interrogation by the same people who hunt terrorists. "They won't understand," I said. "They think this is about a job. They don't understand the stakes." "Then we will make them understand," Marquez said coldly. She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a document. It was a subpoena, signed by a federal judge, authorizing the immediate seizure of all electronic devices within the residence. "Who started it?" Marquez asked again. "I want the name of the person who put the idea in her head. Your mother is malicious, but she isn't creative enough to know how to navigate the whistleblower channels effectively. Someone guided her hand." "Grant," I said. "Grant Keller." Marquez nodded to Pike. "Colonel, bring Mr. Keller in first. Separate him from the herd." "With pleasure," Pike said. "And Cruz," Marquez said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I am sorry it had to be this way. I know you tried to keep the wall up, but they breached it." "They didn't just breach it," I said, staring at the grain of the wood on the table. "They blew it up. Then let's make sure they are the only ones who get caught in the explosion," she said. Cross stood up. He looked at me. "I really am sorry, Ms. Cruz, if I had known." "You did your job, Agent Cross," I said. "Better than you know. If you hadn't stopped, if you had put that interview into the official system, I would be in a black site right now explaining why my mother thinks I am a traitor." Cross shuddered. "Bring them in," Marquez ordered. "One by one. And let's find out just how badly they have broken the world." As Pike opened the door to retrieve my brother-in-law, I heard the muffled sounds of argument from the living room. I heard my father's voice, loud and demanding. I heard my mother's voice, shrill and panicked. They wanted a reaction. They wanted drama. They were about to get the full, unadulterated weight of the United States government. And as I sat there, watching the Deputy Director of National Intelligence prepare to dismantle my family's lies, I realized something. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the asset, and they were the threat. The heavy oak doors of the dining room were closed, sealing us inside a vacuum of sudden, suffocating silence. Outside those doors, my family was likely regrouping, their indignation fermenting into panic, but inside, the atmosphere had shifted from an interrogation to something far more intimate and unsettling. Colonel Pike had stepped out to retrieve my brother-in-law, leaving me alone with Deputy Director Marquez and Special Agent Cross. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the hum of the central air conditioning and the rhythmic tapping of Marquez's stylus against the screen of her tablet. She was scrolling through data, her face illuminated by the cool blue light, her expression unreadable, but it was Agent Cross who drew my attention. Since the revelation of the yellow addendum, his demeanor had undergone a total metamorphosis. The bureaucratic exhaustion was gone, replaced by a kind of haunted reverence. He wasn't looking at me like a suspect anymore. He was looking at me the way a survivor looks at the first light of dawn after a long, freezing night. It was the look of a man seeing a ghost he had only ever heard about in whispers. He took off his glasses and cleaned them nervously with his tie. Then he looked up, meeting my eyes directly. 2019, he said softly. I did not blink. I kept my face impassive, the standard non-committal mask I had worn for a decade. Agent Cross. November 2019, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I was not always doing background checks. Ms. Cruz, before this, I was a field liaison attached to a task force in the Levant. We were operating out of a safe house near the northern border. It was supposed to be a low-risk extraction. I felt a small, cold ripple move down my spine. I knew the region. I knew the timeline. We were blind, Cross said, his eyes unfocused, staring at a memory. Our local assets had gone dark. We had a convoy of 3 vehicles moving through a valley that was supposed to be clear. We had no drone cover that day due to a sandstorm. We were exposed. Marquez stopped tapping on her tablet. She looked up, watching Cross, then watching me. We were 5 minutes from the choke point, Cross said. If we had kept going, we would have been hit by an anti-tank guided missile. The ambush was perfect. We had 0 indication, and then the comms crackled. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. We got a priority override, a voice we had never heard before, synthesized. It didn't give us a suggestion. It gave us a grid coordinate and a single command, halt, turn, now. And then it gave a verification code to prove the order came from the highest authority. Cross swallowed hard. We turned around. 2 minutes later, the hillside where we would have been exploded. 12 men came home to their families that week because of that voice. He looked down at the yellow paper that was still sitting on the table, the red stripe glaring under the chandelier lights. The code on this paper, he said, tapping the document. The designation for the sourcing intelligence. It matches the prefix of the authorization code we received that day. I have never seen it written down until 10 minutes ago. I thought it was a myth. We used to call the source the Oracle in the mess hall. We toasted to it. He looked back at me, his eyes searching for a confirmation I was forbidden to give. That was you, wasn't it? You were the one watching the data stream. You saw the pattern in the chatter that we missed. I sat perfectly still. My heart was beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. I remembered that day. I remembered the intercept, a fragment of a conversation between 2 insurgents discussing a wedding gift for the Americans. I remembered the frantic race to triangulate the signal, the realization that the timeline was tighter than the protocol allowed, and the decision to break the chain of command to send the warning directly to the ground unit. I had received a formal reprimand for the procedural violation and a silent commendation for the save. I could not say yes. To say yes would be to confirm operational specifics that were still classified. But I did not say no. I held his gaze. I let the silence stretch between us, heavy with the weight of 12 lives. I let my eyes soften, just a fraction, dropping the defensive wall for a millisecond. It was a microscopic gesture, invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. But for a man like Cross, it was enough. He let out a long, shaky breath and nodded. Thank you, he mouthed. Agent Cross. Marquez cut in. Her voice was sharp, shattering the moment. She wasn't interested in nostalgia. She was interested in the disaster unfolding in the present. While I appreciate the reunion, we have a crisis to manage. Ms. Cruz's past contributions are not on trial here. Her current exposure is... Cross straightened up, putting his glasses back on. Yes, Director, apologies. Marquez turned her chair to face me fully. The cold, analytical light was back in her eyes. This is the problem. Luna, she said. You are an asset with a history of high-value interventions. You have enemies, real ones, not petty socialites, but state actors who would pay millions for the name of the analyst who stopped that convoy in 2019. And your family just walked into the town square and started shouting that you have secrets. They do not know what I do, I said. They just know I am secretive. It does not matter what they know, Marquez countered. It matters what they have created. In intelligence terms, your mother has created a massive attack surface. She has painted a target on you. She has flagged you as vulnerable, compromised, and potentially reachable. She leaned in. Why? That is the question I need answered before Pike brings your brother-in-law in here. Why would they do this? Is it just money? Is it leverage? Or is there something else? Because from where I sit, this looks like a deliberate attempt to burn a federal employee. I looked at the oil painting of my grandfather hanging on the wall behind her. He was a stern man who had built the company from a single tugboat. He had taught Richard that the world was something to be conquered, not shared. It is not treason, Director, I said quietly. It is narcissism. Marquez raised an eyebrow. Explain. My family. They operate on a system of absolute control, I said, choosing my words with the precision of a linguist. To them, independence is an insult. My career, my silence, my refusal to let them into my life, they see it as a rejection of their authority. They do not hate America. They do not want to hurt the government. They just love themselves more than they respect the law. I took a breath. They wanted to break my clearance so I would lose my job. If I lose my job, I lose my autonomy. I would have to come back here. I would have to work for Everly Atlantic. I would be under their roof, on their payroll, under their thumb. That is the only victory that matters to them. They did not think about national security because, in their minds, nothing is more important than the Everly legacy. Marquez shook her head slowly, a look of disgust crossing her features. They were willing to risk federal prison just to force you to move back home. They did not think they would go to prison, I said. They thought they were writing a letter to a manager. They thought they could speak to the manager of the United States. The door opened. Colonel Pike walked back in. He was alone. Where is Grant? Marquez asked. I put him in the library, Pike said, his voice deep and flat. He is sweating through his shirt. I told him to write down every person he has spoken to in the last 30 days. He is terrified. But before we get to him, I have a question about the infrastructure. Pike walked over to the table and placed a heavy hand on the back of the empty chair. He looked at me. Everly Atlantic Freight, Pike said. That is the family business, correct? Yes, I said. We ran a quick check on the company while we were setting up the perimeter, Pike said. They are not just moving furniture. They have active contracts with the Department of Transportation and 2 subcontracts with Defense Logistics for moving non-lethal supplies to bases in Germany and Okinawa. Is that accurate? I nodded. Yes, it is a major part of their portfolio. About 40% of their annual revenue comes from government or government-adjacent contracts. And they have a customs trade partnership against terrorism certification, Pike noted, which allows them expedited processing at ports. Yes, Pike exchanged a look with Marquez. It was a look that said, they really have no idea what they have done. Luna, Pike said, looking back at me, do you understand what happens to a defense contractor when its primary shareholders are under investigation for maliciously interfering with a top-secret clearance investigation? I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. I knew exactly what happened. I wrote the algorithms that flagged these risks. Immediate suspension of trust, I said. The CTPAT certification gets revoked pending review. All government contracts are frozen. The vessels currently at sea with government cargo, they will be held at port. Correct, Pike said. And the review process for reinstatement. It takes an average of 18 months. For a shipping company operating on thin margins with high fuel costs, an 18-month freeze on 40% of their revenue is not a penalty. It is a death sentence, I finished. They did not just try to get you fired, Pike said grimly. They just handed us the gun to shoot their own company in the head, and we are required by law to pull the trigger. If we flag Richard and Celeste Everly as security risks, which they are, for feeding false information to a federal agency, their company loses its eligibility to bid on anything funded by tax dollars. I closed my eyes for a moment. I thought of my father's pride. I thought of the way he spoke about the company as if it were a living thing, an extension of his own body. He had tried to crush my career to save his ego. In doing so, he had effectively placed a demolition charge at the foundation of his own life's work. He does not know, I whispered. He thinks he is just dealing with a background checker. He has no idea he has just bankrupted himself. He will know soon enough, Marquez said. But that is collateral damage. My concern is the leak. She stood up and walked to the window, peering out through the slats of the blinds at the driveway. You said your mother bragged, Marquez said, her back to me. She talked at her club. Yes, I said. The Port Clayton Country Club. It is the center of their social universe. Who belongs to that club? Marquez asked, turning around. Senators, diplomats, contractors. All of the above, I said. It is a hub for the old money of the South, and old money draws people who want access. Marquez walked back to the table. Her face was grave. If she told a story about her daughter, the secret government analyst, being investigated for suspicious foreign ties, Marquez said quietly, and if she told that story within earshot of a waiter, or a caddy, or another member who happens to be consulting for a foreign firm, she let the sentence hang in the air. Then the story is out, Pike finished. And the story isn't, Luna Cruz is a bad daughter. The story is, Luna Cruz is a vulnerable access point. Marquez leaned down, her hands flat on the table, bringing her face level with mine. We have to assume the worst, Luna, she said. We have to assume that while your mother was sipping her Chardonnay and feeling superior, someone else was listening, someone who knows exactly what a senior linguistics analyst with your profile actually does. And if that is the case, this house is not just a crime scene. She looked at the closed doors. It is a compromised location, and your family. They are not just liabilities anymore. They are loose ends. I stared at her. What are you going to do? We are going to find out exactly who heard her, Marquez said. We are going to trace every single person your mother spoke to, and until we do, nobody leaves this property. We are locking down the Everly Empire, Luna, not to punish them, but because they have proven they are too dangerous to be let out in public. She straightened up and nodded to Pike. Bring in Mr. Keller, she ordered. Let's see if he is ready to trade his mother-in-law to save his own skin. The transformation of my father's dining room was complete. It no longer resembled a place where families shared meals. It had become a forensic operating theater. 2 technicians from Colonel Pike's team had arrived 10 minutes prior, carrying ruggedized Pelican cases. They had set up a localized server on the sideboard, right next to the antique silver tea set. Cables snaked across the Persian rug, connecting laptops that were currently shredding through the digital lives of the Everly family. I sat next to Deputy Director Marquez. We were watching a large monitor that had been propped up against a fruit bowl. On the screen, a timeline was being constructed in real time, pieced together from metadata, cloud backups, and deleted cache files. It was a masterclass in digital autopsy, and the patient on the table was my mother's arrogance. Here is the origin point, a technician said, highlighting a timestamp. 2 weeks ago, Tuesday, 14:30 hours, an email account was created under the username CapitalWatcher55. The user attempted to mask the IP address using a free browser extension, but they logged into a personal iCloud account in a separate tab during the same session. The cookie overlap is 100%. The anonymous whistleblower is Celeste Everly. Marquez didn't even blink. Amateur hour. Show me the distribution. She didn't just email the tip line, the technician continued. She forwarded a draft to a personal contact first, a man named Julian Thorne, former legislative aide, currently a lobbyist for the transport sector. I closed my eyes. I knew Julian. He was a man who traded favors like baseball cards. If my mother had sent him a draft, it meant the accusation wasn't just in a secure government inbox. It was on a lobbyist's server. The content of the letter is being analyzed now, the technician said. pulling up the document. The text of the letter, the weapon my mother had forged, filled the screen. It was painful to read. It was a mix of maternal concern and calculated destruction. But as the analysts began to dissect the claims, the absurdity of her evidence fell apart. Claim 1, the technician read, subject engages in irregular financial transactions with opaque entities. She transfers $4,000 annually to an organization called the Vanguard Shield. That is a charity, I said, my voice flat. They pay for service dogs for veterans with PTSD. It is a 501c3 nonprofit. It is tax deductible. Confirmed, the technician said. Claim 2. Subject maintains contact with foreign nationals using coded language. Reference is made to email traffic with a server at Charles University in Prague. I did my doctoral thesis on Slavic morphology, I explained. I correspond with Professor Novak about linguistic syntax evolution. The codes she refers to are phonetic symbols. They are not ciphers. They are the International Phonetic Alphabet. Marquez shook her head. She took your charity and your education and twisted them into treason. It gets worse, the technician said. She didn't just list accusations. To make herself sound credible, she included patterns of life. She listed the dates of your last 4 trips. She noted that you always leave on a Tuesday and return on a Thursday. She noted that you leave your personal vehicle at a specific long-term lot at Dulles Airport. The room went cold. Marquez turned to me. That is operational data. Luna, she just published your transit habits to a lobbyist and an unsecured tip line. Anyone who intercepts that traffic knows exactly where to find you and when you are vulnerable. Sloan was sitting at the far end of the table. She had been allowed to stay while Grant was being questioned in the library. She was staring at the screen, her face pale. She knew, Sloan whispered. She told me she just wanted to scare you. She said she wanted to embarrass you enough to make you quit. But this listing your parking lot, your flight days. She wanted to be thorough, I said. She wanted to make sure the investigators couldn't ignore the file. She didn't care if she exposed me to a kidnapping team, as long as she won the argument. Sloan looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the realization hit her. This wasn't a family squabble. It was a demolition. She didn't want to teach you a lesson, Sloan said, her voice trembling. She wanted to break you. She wanted to strip you naked in front of the government so you would have nowhere else to go but home. Yes, I said. The library door opened. Colonel Pike walked in, pushing Grant ahead of him. My brother-in-law looked like a man who had just run a marathon in a wool suit. His tie was loosened, and he was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief that was already soaked. Sit, Pike ordered, pointing to a chair opposite the screen. Grant sat. He looked at the monitor, saw the email drafts, and swallowed hard. We know you helped her draft the compliance language. Mr. Keller? Marquez said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. We found the edits in the document history. You changed weird friends to unreported foreign associations. You changed money problems to financial vulnerability indicators. You militarized her gossip. I was just trying to help, Grant stammered. Celeste was going to send a rambling mess. I just wanted to make sure it was professional. If you are going to file a complaint, it should be accurate. Accurate? Pike scoffed. You fabricated intent. I didn't know it was dangerous, Grant insisted, looking at Sloan for support. But she turned her face away. I thought it was just a background check, a standard HR thing. I work in risk management. I know how these things work. You know how corporate compliance works, Marquez corrected him. You know nothing about counterintelligence, but that is not what worries me. Mr. Keller, what worries me is the invoice we found on your phone. The air in the room shifted. Grant froze. What invoice? He asked, his voice cracking. The technician just scrubbed your deleted items, Marquez said. 3 weeks ago, you contacted a firm called Cerberus Global Solutions. You paid them $5,000 for a comprehensive digital footprint analysis on a subject. She leaned forward. Who is the subject? Grant? Grant didn't answer. He stared at the table, It was Luna, wasn't it? Sloane asked. Her voice was ice. You hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my sister. I had to. Grant exploded, throwing his hands up. Celeste was pushing me to find something concrete. She kept saying Luna was hiding something shameful. I figured if we could find a debt, or a secret boyfriend, or a drug problem, we could use it to force her home without getting the government involved. I was trying to keep it in the family. So you hired Cerberus, Pike said, his tone dropping to a dangerous growl. Do you know who Cerberus is, Mr. Keller? They are a security consultancy, Grant said. They have a website. They looked legitimate. They are data brokers, Pike said. They are former mercenaries who sell information to the highest bidder. They don't just investigate, they hack, they fish, they sell profiles to corporate espionage teams. I felt the blood drain from my face. Grant, I said, my voice barely audible. Did you give them my social security number? Did you give them my date of birth? I gave them what I had, Grant said defensively. I wanted a full report. You idiot, Pike said. He didn't shout. He just stated it as a fact. You paid a group of gray market hackers to aggressively probe the background of a covert action asset. You paid them to poke holes in a legend that the DoD spent 10 years building. I didn't know, Grant yelled. When Cerberus couldn't find anything on Luna Cruz the analyst, Marquez said, connecting the dots. Because her file is scrubbed. What did they do? Did they report back to you? They said the file was too clean, Grant admitted. They said it looked like a ghost file. They offered to go deeper. They said they had contacts who could check the dark web for other matches. And did you authorize it? Pike asked. Grant hesitated. I told them to find the truth. So you authorized a dark web search on a classified identity, Marquez said. She sat back in her chair, looking at Grant with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Congratulations. Mr. Keller, you didn't just trigger an internal investigation. You effectively put a bounty on your sister-in-law's head in the digital underworld. I stared at Grant. This was the man who sat at our holiday dinners and bragged about his golf handicap. This was the man who claimed to protect the family reputation. In his arrogance, in his desperate need to be the smartest guy in the room, he had hired wolves to hunt me. Do you realize what you have done? I asked. If Cerberus flagged my profile as a ghost file on the open market, every intelligence agency from Beijing to Moscow just got a ping. You didn't just expose me, you auctioned me off. I can call them, Grant said, panic rising in his voice. I can tell them to stop. I will ask for a refund. You cannot call them, Pike said, because the moment we finish here, your phone is going into an evidence bag, and you are going into a federal holding cell. Sloane, Grant pleaded, tell them I was doing it for us, for the company. If Luna came back, the family would be whole again. We would be stronger. Sloane stood up. She walked over to her husband. For a moment, I thought she might comfort him. Instead, she looked at him as if he were a stranger she had just met in a bad dream. You weren't doing it for the family, Sloane said. You were doing it because you hate that she is smarter than you. You hate that she has a life you cannot control, and you wanted to be the one who brought her down. She turned away from him and looked at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were angry tears. We have to assume the worst, Marquez said to the room. If Cerberus has been digging for 3 weeks, the cover is blown. The Luna Cruz identity is compromised. We have to assume the adversaries know she is not just an analyst. What does that mean? Sloane asked me. It means I cannot go back to my apartment, I said. It means I cannot go back to my office. It means the life I built for 10 years is gone, because Grant wanted to be helpful. But there was one loose end that terrified me more than Grant's incompetence. Grant was a fool who used a credit card. His trail was traceable. But my mother worked in whispers. Grant hired the hackers, I said, turning to Sloane. But Mom is the one who talks. She talks to feel important. I looked my sister in the eye. Sloane, I said, you were with her at the club. You were with her at the salon. You know how she is when she has a glass of wine and wants to be the center of attention." Sloane nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I need you to think," I said. "Not as her daughter, but as a witness. How many people did she tell? How many people know that she was investigating me? How many people know about the suspicious travel she made up?" Sloane opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at the floor. She tried to count. I could see her doing the math, the luncheons, the charity committee meetings, the phone calls to aunts and cousins. "Sloane," I pressed, "how many—" Sloane looked up at me. Her face was a mask of devastation. "I don't know," she whispered. "Everyone." She told everyone who would listen. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just a breach. It was a flood. My mother hadn't just unlocked the door. She had taken the walls down, and now, sitting in the ruins of my privacy. I realized that the danger wasn't coming. It was already here, carried on the wind of 1,000 casual conversations, fueled by the vanity of a woman who loved her own voice more than her daughter's life. The interrogation of my parents took place in the formal living room, a space dominated by a grand piano that no one in the family knew how to play, and a fireplace large enough to roast a whole hog. Richard and Celeste sat on the cream-colored velvet sofa, looking less like the masters of the house and more like two naughty children who had been called to the principal's office. Deputy Director Marquez sat in the high-backed wing chair opposite them. Colonel Pike stood by the mantel, looming over the room like a gargoyle in dress blues. I stood in the archway, half in the shadows, witnessing the collision between the unstoppable force of the federal government and the immovable object of my father's ego. "Let me get this straight," Richard said, his face a map of broken capillaries. "You are telling me that because my wife wrote a private letter expressing concern about her daughter, you are threatening to audit my company." "We are not threatening, Mr. Everly," Marquez said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "We are notifying. There is a distinction." "This is absurd," Richard spat. "Everly Atlantic Freight is a pillar of this community. We move 3 million tons of cargo a year. We have a contract with the Maritime Administration pending renewal next month. You cannot just waltz in here and disrupt commerce because of a family misunderstanding." "It ceased to be a family misunderstanding the moment your wife utilized federal channels to convey false information regarding a clearance holder," Marquez replied. "Under Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code, making materially false, fictitious, or fraudulent statements to a government agency is a felony. When those statements are directed at a special access program asset, the severity escalates." "I did not know," Celeste cried out. She was twisting a handkerchief in her hands, deploying the waterworks she usually reserved for getting out of speeding tickets. "I am just a mother. Director Marquez, surely you have children. You must understand. I was worried Luna was losing her way. I just wanted to bring her back to the fold." Marquez did not offer a tissue. She did not offer sympathy. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Mrs. Everly, you did not file a missing persons report," Marquez said. "You filed a counterintelligence tip. You alleged that your daughter was compromised by foreign entities. In our world, that does not trigger a family reunion. It triggers a threat assessment. If we had believed you, if Agent Cross had not been diligent, Luna would currently be in a holding cell undergoing enhanced interrogation. Is that how a worried mother brings her child home?" Celeste blinked, the tears momentarily drying up as the reality of the statement hit her. "I thought they would just fire her." "You attempted to weaponize the security apparatus of the United States for personal grievance," Pike added from the mantel. "That is not parenting. That is sabotage." Richard waved his hand dismissively. Fine. Celeste made a mistake. She overreacted. We will retract the letter. I will have my lawyers draft a formal apology to your department. We can make a donation to the whatever fund you people have for widows and orphans. Let us just settle this like reasonable adults." I watched Pike's jaw tighten. My father was trying to buy his way out of a treason investigation. He was treating the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, like a zoning board member he could bribe with a golf trip. "Mr. Everly," Pike said, his voice dropping to a gravelly rumble. "Did you just offer a financial inducement to a federal officer to alter the outcome of an investigation?" "I am offering to make things right," Richard insisted. "Look, I know how Washington works. I play golf with Senator Holloway. I can have him on the phone in 5 minutes. He will tell you that the Everly family are patriots. We are job creators. We do not need this harassment." "Sir," Marquez said, standing up, "I strongly suggest you do not call Senator Holloway, because if you do, I will be forced to inform the senator that his donors are currently subjects of an active inquiry involving the mishandling of classified information. Do you think the senator wants that attached to his re-election campaign?" Richard closed his mouth. The color drained from his face. For the first time, he realized that his money was not a shield. It was just paper. "Now," Marquez continued, "let us discuss the flag you mentioned earlier." Richard stiffened. "What flag?" "The red flag that has just been attached to Everly Atlantic Freight's vendor profile," Marquez said. "You see, Mr. Everly, when an allegation of foreign influence is leveled against a family member of a defense contractor, the risk algorithms do not discriminate. Your wife claimed Luna had unreported foreign financial ties. Since Luna is a direct heir to your estate, and your estate is the financial bedrock of your company, the system automatically assumes the company might be compromised as well." "That is impossible," Richard whispered. "We are clean. We have the highest compliance rating." "Do you?" Pike asked. He picked up a file from the coffee table. "Because according to the preliminary audit we just ran, Everly Atlantic Freight received a warning letter 2 years ago regarding a subcontractor in Malaysia. A subcontractor with links to state-owned enterprises that are currently under sanctions." "That was a clerical error," Richard shouted. "We fired them immediately." "Maybe," Pike said, "but in light of your wife's claims that there is foreign influence in this family, that clerical error is being reopened for review. Until that review is complete, your renewal with the Maritime Administration is on indefinite hold." "You cannot do that," Richard gasped. "The renewal is in 3 weeks. If we miss the window, we lose our priority status at the ports of Norfolk and Savannah. We will bleed millions in demurrage fees. It will bankrupt us." "Then you should have taught your wife not to lie to the Pentagon," Marquez said coldly. I turned away from the scene. It was brutal, and it was efficient. My parents were being dismantled by the very rules they claimed to uphold. They had lived their lives believing that the law was something they applied to other people, to employees, to tenants, to me. Now, the law was a cage, and they were trapped inside it. I walked into the hallway, needing a moment of air. The air in the living room was thick with the smell of desperation. "Luna!" I turned. Sloane was standing by the entrance to the kitchen. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked like a woman who had just survived a car crash, only to realize the car was still burning. "Sloane," I said, "you should go sit down." "I cannot sit down," she said, her voice shaking. "I listened to them. In the library. Grant is going to jail. Isn't he?" "He hired hackers to breach a federal firewall," I said. "He broke the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Yes, Sloane, he is likely going to prison." Sloane leaned against the wall, sliding down until she was crouching on the floor. She put her head in her hands. "He told me he was protecting the company. He told me he was protecting me." "He was protecting his ego," I said gently. "Just like Mom." Sloane looked up. Her expression changed. The sorrow hardened into something else, something brittle and sharp. "Mom," she whispered. "She is in there playing the victim. Isn't she crying about how much she loves you?" "Yes," I said. Sloane reached into the pocket of her cardigan. Her hand was trembling, but her grip was firm. She pulled out her phone. "She is not a victim," Sloane said. "She knew exactly what she was doing, and she was proud of it." "What do you mean?" Sloane unlocked the phone. She navigated to the voice memos app. "Last Sunday, after brunch, Grant and I were leaving, but I forgot my purse. I came back inside. Mom was on the phone with one of her friends from the club. She didn't hear me come in. I recorded it. I don't know why. Maybe because I had a bad feeling. Maybe because I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy for thinking this was wrong. She held the phone out to me. Take it. I took the device. What is on this? Sloan? The truth, she said. I walked into the kitchen, away from the living room, and pressed play. I held the phone up to my ear. The audio was crisp. My mother's voice cut through the static, loud and clear. Oh, Beatrice, do not worry, Celeste's recorded voice said. She sounded giddy, almost drunk with power. I have sent the letter. It is a masterpiece. I accused her of everything short of murder. By the time the government is done untangling the mess, Luna will be radioactive. She will lose that clearance, lose that pension, and she will come crawling back to Port Clayton. And the best part? She will have to thank me for giving her a job at the company. I'm going to put her in the archives room, let her rot in the basement for a few years until she learns some respect. There was a pause on the recording, followed by a cruel laugh. No, she will never know it was me. I used a fake name. Grant says it is untraceable. We are going to break her, Beatrice, and then we are going to rebuild her properly. The recording ended. I lowered the phone. My hand was steady, but my insides were ice. There was no worried mother in that recording. There was only a sociopath playing God. She had planned my destruction with the casual glee of a child pulling wings off a fly. She wanted to break me. She wanted to put me in a basement. I looked at Sloan. She was standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. I am sorry, Sloan whispered. I should have stopped her. I was too afraid. You are stopping her now, I said. What are you going to do with it? She asked. I am going to follow procedure, I said. I walked past Sloan, back toward the living room. I didn't storm in. I didn't shout. I walked with the measured pace of a senior analyst delivering a critical intelligence update. In the living room, Richard was still bargaining. Look, surely we can make a call, he was saying to Pike. There must be a civil penalty we can pay. A fine. I can write a check right now. There is no check large enough. Mr. Everly, Pike said wearily. I stepped into the room. Director Marquez. Marquez turned. She saw the phone in my hand. She saw the look on my face, the look of an asset who has just acquired the final piece of the puzzle. What is it? Cruz? I have new evidence regarding the intent of the subject. Celeste Everly, I said formally. It is a digital audio recording, time-stamped 4 days prior to the submission of the complaint. It was provided by a cooperating witness. Celeste's head snapped up. What witness? I didn't look at her. I walked to the table where the forensic technician was working. I am transferring the file now via airdrop. Please tag it as Exhibit Delta. Luna, Celeste said, her voice rising in pitch. What are you doing? What recording? The technician accepted the file. He nodded to Marquez. File received. Director, ready for playback. Play it, Marquez ordered. No. Richard stood up. I do not consent to... Sit down. Richard. Pike barked. The command was so loud it rattled the windows. Richard sat. The technician pressed a key. My mother's voice filled the room. Not the weeping, fragile voice she had been using for the last hour, but the arrogant, vindictive voice from the kitchen. I have sent the letter. It is a masterpiece. By the time the government is done untangling the mess, Luna will be radioactive. The color drained from Celeste's face so completely she looked like a corpse. She stared at the speaker, her mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. We are going to break her, Beatrice. The recording finished. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Marquez looked at Celeste. The look was not one of anger. It was one of absolute professional finality. That, Marquez said quietly, is proof of malicious intent. It proves premeditation. It proves that you knowingly filed a false statement with the intent to cause harm to a federal employee and disrupt government operations. Celeste whispered. I was joking. It was just talk. It was a confession, Marquez said. And it destroys any defense your lawyers might have concocted about you being a confused parent. You conspired to destroy a national security asset for your own amusement. Richard looked at his wife. He looked at her as if he had never seen her before. You said it was untraceable, Richard whispered. You told me it was safe. You told me it would just be a little scare. Richard, please. Celeste reached for him, but he pulled away. You destroyed us, Richard said, his voice trembling with fury. You put it on tape. You bragged about it. Do you have any idea what you have done to the company? To me? I did it for us, Celeste screamed, finally snapping. I did it because she thinks she is better than us. Look at her standing there with them. She chose them over us. Richard, she needed to be punished. And there it is, I said. I looked at my mother. She was panting, her face twisted in hate. The mask was gone. You didn't want a daughter, I said calmly. You wanted a prisoner. Marquez stood up and buttoned her jacket. Colonel Pike, I believe we have enough for the preliminary detainer. The audio confirms the motive. We can proceed with the federal charges. Understood, Pike said. Celeste looked around wildly. Charges. You cannot charge me. I am Celeste Everly. I organized the spring gala. I know the governor. Mrs. Everly, Marquez said, picking up her portfolio. You are about to learn that in the hierarchy of the United States government, the spring gala does not rank very high. You tried to play a game of chess with the Pentagon. You just lost your queen. I looked at the phone in my hand. Sloan had given me the weapon, but I was the one who pulled the trigger. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I felt only the cold, clean satisfaction of a job done correctly. My mother still thought her connections would save her. She didn't realize that I held the keys to the kingdom she was so desperate to enter, and I had just locked the gates forever. The sound of a ballpoint pen scratching against paper can be deafening when it is the only sound in the room. We were back in the library. My mother, Celeste, sat at my father's heavy oak desk. She was not signing a check or a thank you card for a gala donation. She was signing a non-disclosure agreement, a document so thick it looked less like a contract and more like a novella. Deputy Director Marquez stood over her, tapping a manicured finger on the signature line. Initials here, Marquez said, and full signature here. Understand what this means. Mrs. Everly, you are acknowledging that any further discussion of your daughter's employment, her clearance status, or the events of this day with any unauthorized person including your husband, your priest, or your hairdresser will result in immediate prosecution under the Espionage Act. Celeste's hand trembled. The ink smeared slightly. She looked up at Marquez with wet, red-rimmed eyes. I cannot even tell Beatrice that I made a mistake. If you tell Beatrice anything other than, the weather is lovely, Colonel Pike rumbled from the corner, we will consider it a breach. You are effectively gagged. You wanted to know secrets. Now you have to carry the weight of keeping one. Celeste signed. She dropped the pen as if it were burning hot. She looked at me, waiting for me to comfort her, to tell her it was just a formality. I stayed silent. I was done soothing the arsonist who had set my house on fire, while Celeste was legally binding herself to silence. My father was staring at his iPad in the corner of the room. He had been quiet for 20 minutes, frantically refreshing his email. It is happening, Richard whispered. His voice was hollow. What is happening? Dad? Sloan asked. She was standing by the window, hugging her arms around herself, keeping a physical distance from her husband. Grant. The notifications, Richard said, looking up. He looked 10 years older than he had at breakfast. The system it is automated. I just got an alert from the port of Norfolk. Our priority berthing for the Everly Queen has been rescinded. They moved us to the back of the queue. That is a 48-hour delay. He swiped the screen. And here, the Defense Logistics Agency, a stop work order on the Germany contract. Pending administrative review of vendor eligibility, he looked at Pike. You stopped the ships. You actually stopped the ships. We did not stop them, sir, Pike said. The system stopped them. You are a security risk. The computer does not care that it is your birthday. It cares that the principal owner of the company is married to a woman who confessed to fabricating intelligence. This will cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, Richard said, his voice rising to a panic. If the clients find out why— They won't, Marquez said, unless you tell them, and if you do, you violate the NDA your wife just signed. You are in a box. Mr. Everly, the only way out is to sit still and wait for the review to finish, which, as we discussed, could take 18 months. Richard slumped into the leather armchair. The empire he had built, the legacy he used to bludgeon me with at every family gathering, was grinding to a halt because he couldn't control his wife's need for drama. But the real demolition wasn't the business. It was the marriage sitting across the room. Grant was sitting on a small ottoman, looking like a cornered rat. He had been sweating through his shirt for an hour. Pike had already confiscated his phone and laptop. Now, Marquez turned her attention to him. "We have dealt with the leak," Marquez said, gesturing to Celeste. "Now, let us deal with the hacker, Mr. Keller. We know you hired Cerberus. We know you paid for the deep dive, but the timeline bothers me." She walked over to him. "You hired them 3 weeks ago, a full week before Celeste sent her email. You were digging before she even asked you to help with the letter." Grant swallowed hard. "I told you. I was being proactive. I knew Celeste was worried." "Bullshit," I said. The word cut through the room. My family turned to look at me. I never swore in front of them. It wasn't ladylike. "You didn't care about Mom's worries," I said, walking toward him. "And you didn't care about bringing me home. If I came home, if I quit the DOD and took a job at Everly Atlantic, I would be back in the line of succession. I would be the eldest daughter returning to the fold. I would be a threat to you." Grant laughed nervously. "A threat, Luna. You are a language analyst. I run compliance. We are in different lanes." "You want to run the company," I said. "Dad is 65. He's looking for a successor. Sloan is the face, but you are the operator. You want the CEO chair." I looked at Sloan. She was watching her husband with a strange intensity, her eyes narrowing. "If I come back," I continued, keeping my eyes on Grant, "I am the prodigal daughter. Dad would give me a VP role just to prove a point. He would pit us against each other. You didn't want that. You didn't want me back. Then why would I help Celeste get you fired?" Grant shot back. "Because you didn't just want me fired," I said. "You hired Cerberus to find dirt, real dirt. Illegal activity, moral turpitude. You wanted a scandal so big that Dad would cut me out of the will entirely." Grant's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted to Richard, then to Sloan. "You wanted me disgraced," I said. "You wanted to make sure that when I fell so hard that I would be toxic. You wanted to make sure that even if I came home, I would never be allowed near the boardroom. You wanted a clear path to the throne." "Grant," Sloan whispered. Grant stood up. "That is ridiculous. Sloan, honey, don't listen to her. She's paranoid. It is the government training." "Is it?" Sloan asked. She walked toward him. 3 months ago, you asked Dad to change the bylaws regarding family members with criminal records serving on the board. You said it was best practice. I thought it was just legal housekeeping." She stopped 3 feet from him. "But if Luna had been investigated for treason, if she had been charged because of the evidence you tried to manufacture, she would have been barred from the company. By the rule you wrote." Grant's face went white. The pieces snapped together. He hadn't just been helping a meddling mother-in-law. He had been engineering a coup. "I did it for us," Grant pleaded, reaching for her hand. Sloan recoiled as if he were a snake. "Sloan, think about it. Luna has been gone for 10 years. She doesn't care about the business. Why should she get half? Why should she come back and take what we built? I was protecting your inheritance." "You were protecting yourself," Sloan said, her voice shaking with a cold rage I had never heard before. "You used my mother. You used my sister. You almost destroyed the company you claimed to care about, just to secure your own promotion." "I am the only one who knows how to run this place," Grant shouted, losing his composure. "Your father is a dinosaur." "And you are great with clients, Sloan, but you don't have the stomach for the real work. I am the one holding it together. Richard stood up slowly. His face was purple. What did you say? You heard me, Richard. Grant sneered, realizing the bridge was already burned. You are running this company into the ground with your ego. I was trying to save it from being split up by a daughter who doesn't give a damn about it. Get out, Richard whispered. I live here, Grant said. Not anymore, Richard roared. Get out of my house. You are fired. Do you hear me? You are done. You cannot fire me, Grant said, adjusting his jacket. I have a contract. I have severance. Actually, Colonel Pike interrupted, stepping forward with a pair of silver handcuffs. You have a federal detention order. Mr. Keller, you are under arrest for conspiracy to violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and for solicitation of illegal surveillance against a federal employee. Grant froze. You are arrested. Turn around, Pike ordered. We watched in silence as Pike spun Grant around and clicked the cuffs onto his wrists. The risk management expert was marched out of the library, past the rows of leather-bound books, looking small and pathetic. Sloane didn't move. She didn't cry. She just stared at the empty doorway. Sloane, Celeste said softly. Darling, I am so sorry. I didn't know. He tricked me too. Sloane turned slowly to look at our mother. He didn't trick you. Mom, he just gave you a loaded gun. You were the one who pulled the trigger. But I did it for you, Celeste insisted, falling back on her favorite defense. I wanted the family together. I wanted Luna home. Stop it, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it stopped Celeste mid-sentence. I walked to the center of the room, standing between my parents and my sister. Stop lying, I said. You didn't want me home because you missed me. You wanted me home because you couldn't stand the fact that I have a life you cannot see. You hate that I answer to someone else. You hate that I have a purpose that isn't serving the Everly name. That is not true, Celeste sobbed. I am your mother. I have a right to know what my child is doing. You shut us out. Luna, you made us do this. If you had just told us the truth, none of this would have happened. There it was, the gaslight, the twist that made the victim the villain. I didn't make you do anything, I said coldly. And regarding the truth, I am an officer of the United States Defense Intelligence Apparatus. I signed an oath. That oath supersedes your curiosity. It supersedes your feelings. It supersedes your need to show off to your friends at the club. I looked at Richard. You taught me that contracts are sacred. Dad, well, I signed one, a big one. And you are angry because for the first time in your life, you are not the most powerful person in the room. We are your family, Richard said, his voice trembling. That should mean something. It does, I said. It means I didn't have you arrested along with Grant. It means I'm letting you keep your house instead of having it seized as a base of operations for a foreign intelligence investigation. That is the mercy I'm showing you, but do not confuse mercy with forgiveness. I turned to Sloane. She looked shattered. She had lost her husband, her illusion of a perfect marriage, and her faith in her parents in the span of 3 hours. Sloane, I said softly, you don't need to know what I do. You don't need to know the codes or the missions. You just need to know one thing. She looked at me, her eyes searching. They tried to ruin my life because they were bored and insecure, I said. They were willing to burn me down to warm their own egos. That is not love. That is ownership. Sloane looked at Celeste, who was weeping into her hands. She looked at Richard, who was staring blankly at the wall, mourning his lost profits. Then she looked at me. I didn't know, Sloane whispered. I really didn't know Grant was capable of that. I know, I said. But now you do. Come here, Sloane, Celeste said, reaching out a hand. Come sit with Mommy. We will figure this out. We will hire the best lawyers for Grant. We will fix the company. Sloane looked at her mother's hand. It was manicured, perfect, and adorned with a diamond ring that cost more than my annual salary. It was the hand that had written the letter that started this war. Sloane took a step back. No, Sloane said. Celeste froze. Excuse me? No, Sloane repeated, louder this time. She walked across the room. She didn't walk toward the door. She walked toward me. She stood next to me, shoulder to shoulder. We were not touching, but the alignment was unmistakable. For the first time since we were children, the Everly sisters were on the same side of the line. I am not helping Grant, Sloane said, her voice steadying. And I am not helping you fix this. Mom, you broke it. You fix it. I am going to the office to see if there is a company left to save, and I am doing it my way. Sloane, Richard barked, you do not walk away from us. Watch me, Sloane said. She looked at me. Do you need a ride to the airport? Or back to D.C.? I have a ride, I said, nodding toward Marquez. But thank you. Sloane nodded. She looked at our parents one last time, a tableau of wealth and ruin, and then she turned and walked out of the library. I watched her go, a small knot of tension in my chest, one I had carried for 20 years, finally loosened. Marquez closed the folder on the desk. Mrs. Everly, Mr. Everly, we are done here. You have your instructions. Do not leave the state. Do not speak to the press. And for the love of God, stay off the internet. She signaled to me. Cruz, let's go. I turned to leave. Luna, my mother called out. Her voice was small, stripped of all its artifice. Will I see you for Christmas? I stopped in the doorway. I looked back at the woman who had given me life and then tried to sell it for social currency. I don't think so, Mother, I said. I think I will be working. I have a lot of paperwork to catch up on. After all, someone has to clean up the mess. I walked out into the hall, leaving them alone in the silence of their big, expensive, empty house. The blast radius of a grenade is determined by the amount of explosive material and the density of the casing. The blast radius of a secret in Washington, D.C. is determined by how many ambitious people hear it. My mother had dropped a grenade in the middle of the Port Clayton Country Club, and now, 48 hours later, the shrapnel was hitting people she had called her best friends for 20 years. The investigation did not stop at the gates of the Everly estate. While Colonel Pike's team dismantled our home network, a second team of field agents was dispatched to the manicured lawns and marble foyers of the local elite. They paid a visit to Beatrice, the woman on the other end of the phone recording. They visited the 3 women my mother had lunched with on Tuesday. They visited the club manager and the bartender who had been pouring drinks while Celeste Everly loudly announced her plan to humble her daughter. We watched the fallout from the command center in the dining room. It was like watching a social ecosystem collapse in real time. Beatrice was the first to fold. According to the field report that flashed on Deputy Director Marquez's screen, Beatrice did not even wait for the agents to finish reading the subpoena. She handed over her phone, her email password, and a sworn statement claiming that she had tried to stop Celeste, that she had been uncomfortable with the conversation, and that she had absolutely no part in the conspiracy. She threw my mother to the wolves to save her own standing on the charity board. Then came the phone calls, or rather, the lack of them. Celeste was sitting in the corner, staring at her mobile device. She had been released from the interrogation, but was still barred from leaving the house. She was trying to reach out to her network, desperate for validation, desperate for someone to tell her that this was all a terrible mistake. They are not picking up, Celeste whispered, tapping the screen with a trembling finger. I called Lydia. It went straight to voicemail. I texted Sarah. The message failed to deliver. They have blocked you. Mother, I said, not looking up from my own report. But we are hosting the autumn ball together next month, she stammered. Why would they block me? Because the FBI just knocked on their doors asking about you. I said, in your world, social standing is currency. You are currently devalued. You are a liability. They are cutting their losses before they get infected by your scandal. Celeste looked at me with a mixture of horror and confusion. She had spent 40 years curating these relationships, believing they were built on mutual respect. She was learning, painfully late in life, that they were built on mutual utility, and she was no longer useful. But the social ostracization was just the appetizer. The main course was served an hour later, and it was my father who had to swallow it. Colonel Pike walked back into the room holding a dossier that had just been couriered from the Atlanta field office. His expression was grim. He walked past my mother and dropped the file in front of Richard. "We found the leak," Pike said. Richard looked up, hopeful. "You mean you found out who told the government?" "No," Pike said. "We found out who else was listening when your wife was holding court at the club last week. And it is worse than we thought." Pike opened the file. It contained a grainy security photo from the country club's terrace. It showed my mother at her table, gesturing wildly with a wineglass. But Pike pointed to a figure in the background, a man sitting 2 tables away, his back turned, apparently reading a newspaper. "Identify this man," Pike ordered. Richard squinted at the photo. He shook his head. "I don't know. A guest. He does not look familiar." "His name is Arthur Vane," Pike said. "He is not a member. He was a guest of the club treasurer that day. Do you know who Arthur Vane works for? Mr. Everly?" Richard shook his head again. "He is the senior director of business development for Meridian Logistics," Pike said. The air left the room. Meridian Logistics was Everly Atlantic's fiercest competitor. They had been fighting over the Savannah port contracts for a decade. They were the sharks circling the same waters. "He was sitting 10 feet away," Pike continued, his voice devoid of sympathy. "He heard your wife tell her friends that she was initiating a security clearance investigation against her daughter. He heard her mention suspicious travel and financial irregularities. He heard her say that the family company might be under scrutiny as a result." Richard turned an ashen gray. He heard everything. He heard enough. Pike said, "We checked the logs. 2 hours after that lunch, Arthur Vane sent a priority memo to his legal team. The subject line was Everly vulnerability. The next morning, 12 hours before the official flag even hit your file, Meridian Logistics filed an unsolicited bid for your maritime administration contract." "That is corporate espionage," Richard sputtered. "No, sir," Pike corrected him. "That is competitive intelligence. Your wife broadcast proprietary risk information in a public space. Vane just picked it up and used it. He alerted the contracting officer that Everly Atlantic was facing an internal security crisis involving its ownership family. He suggested that Meridian was a safer, more stable alternative for the government." Richard stood up, his hands shaking so hard he knocked over his water glass. "They are stealing my contract." "They are not stealing it," Marquez added from her seat. "They are catching it because you dropped it. The contracting officer put your renewal on hold because of the flag. Yes, but Meridian is the one who made sure the officer knew exactly where to look. They weaponized your wife's gossip to take your business." Richard turned slowly to look at Celeste. If looks could kill, my mother would have disintegrated on the spot. "You gave them the ammunition," Richard whispered. "You sat there, and you handed Arthur Vane the keys to our biggest contract." "I didn't know he was there," Celeste cried, shrinking back into the sofa. "I was just talking to the girls." "You were talking about national security matters," Richard roared. "You were talking about things you do not understand, and now Meridian is going to eat us alive. That contract is 20% of our annual revenue. Celeste, 20%. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a desperate, frantic idea. He walked over to where I sat, grabbing the edge of the table. "Luna," he said, his voice dropping to a pleading urgency. "You can fix this." I looked at him. "Excuse me?" "You are the government," he said. "You are whatever it is you are. You have this high-level clearance. You have these people here." He gestured to Marquez and Pike. "Make a call. Tell the Maritime Administration that this is all a mistake. Tell them the investigation is bogus. Tell them to reject Meridian's bid and reinstate us." I stared at him, even now, facing the ruin he had helped create. He viewed me not as a person, but as a resource to be exploited. He thought my clearance was a magic wand he could wave to fix his bottom line. "You want me to interfere in a federal contracting process?" I asked calmly. I want you to save the family business, Richard insisted. Use your pull. Tell them we are loyal patriots. Tell them to clear the flag. Dad, I said, standing up to meet his gaze. I cannot do that. You won't do that, he accused. I cannot do that, I repeated. And I should not do that. The flag on the company is legitimate. Dad, the company is owned by people who fabricate intelligence and leak secrets to competitors. The system is working exactly as it is designed. It is protecting the government from you. We are your parents, he shouted. You owe us. I owe the Constitution, I said. And right now, you are the threat. You treated the security apparatus of the United States like a toy. You thought you could pull a string and make me dance. Well, you pulled the string, and you brought the ceiling down. I am not going to hold it up for you. Richard looked at me with pure hatred. You are enjoying this. I am surviving this, I said. There is a difference. Director Marquez, Pike interrupted. We have one more item regarding Mr. Keller. Richard turned away from me, defeated, but the hits kept coming. What now? Richard asked wearily. Is he stealing the silverware too? We finished the forensic image of his laptop. Pike said, We found the emails to the hackers, but we also found a folder named Contingency. Pike tapped a key on his laptop, and a document appeared on the main screen. It was a memo, drafted on Everly Atlantic letterhead, but it had never been officially filed in the company archives. Mr. Keller sent this to 3 of your private equity partners last week, Pike said. I read the text on the screen. It was a risk assessment regarding the succession plan of the company. In it, Grant had written that rumors of instability regarding the eldest daughter were circulating in Washington. He suggested that the board should preemptively amend the trust to ensure that individuals with pending security adjudication be permanently barred from voting shares. He hadn't just tried to get me fired. He had tried to inoculate the company against my return before I even packed a bag. He told the investors I was a security risk before the investigation even started, I said, reading the timestamp. He was planting the seed. He was trying to spook the money, Richard realized. He wanted the investors to demand that Luna be cut out. He was using you as a boogeyman to consolidate his own power. Sloane walked into the room. She had returned from her brief trip to the home office. She looked pale, but her eyes were dry. She saw the document on the screen. She read her husband's words. He sent this to the equity partners, Sloane asked. Her voice was flat. Yes, Pike said. He was actively undermining the family's reputation to secure his own position. Sloane nodded slowly. She looked at Richard. He played us, Dad. He played all of us. He knew Mom would talk. He knew you would react. He wound us up and watched us go. Richard sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I trusted him. I treated him like a son. And you treated your daughter like a traitor, I said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of 20 years of mistakes. Sloane walked over to the table. She picked up a notepad and a pen. Director Marquez, Sloane said, I am currently the acting chief operating officer of Everly Atlantic. Given that my father is compromised and my husband is in federal custody, Marquez looked at her with interest. That is correct. I want to cooperate, Sloane said. Fully? I want to open our books to your auditors. I want to hand over every email, every contract, every communication Grant Keller ever touched. If there is rot in this company, I want it cut out. Sloane, what are you doing? Richard asked, looking up. You do not invite the auditors in. You manage them. No, Dad, Sloane said, turning to him. That is the old way. That is the way that got us here. Grant tried to manage things. You tried to manage things. And look where we are. She turned back to Marquez. I am done lying. I am done covering up. If Meridian takes the contract, they take it. If we lose money, we lose money. But I am not going to lose my sister again. She looked at me. It was the first time in my adult life that I saw my sister look at me not as a rival or a weirdo, or a problem to be solved, but as an equal. "I am sorry, Luna," Sloane said. "I am so sorry I let them do this to you." "Thank you, Sloane," I said. Marquez stood up. She checked her watch. It was 1800 hours. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the ruins of the Everly dining room. "We have what we need here," Marquez said. "The forensic team will stay to finish the data extraction. Colonel Pike and I are returning to Washington." She looked at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Everly," she said, "you will remain at this residence until further notice. You will surrender your passports to Colonel Pike before we leave. Your lawyer can contact our office on Monday regarding the charges." "Charges?" Celeste whispered. "Conspiracy, making false statements, obstruction." Marquez listed them off like grocery items. "It will be a long list." She turned to me. "Dr. Cruz," she said, "this phase is complete, but the adjudication is not." "I know," I said. "There will be a formal hearing," Marquez said, "at the Pentagon, 3 days from now. We need to assess the final status of your clearance and determine if your cover can be salvaged or if you need to be permanently reassigned." She paused. "Your family will be required to attend, not as guests, as witnesses. We need their testimony on the record. Under oath, in a secure facility. We need to close the loop definitively." "I understand," I said. "We will send a transport for you," Marquez said. "Be ready at 0800 hours on Monday." She signaled to Pike. The colonel collected the passports from my stunned parents. He gave me a sharp nod, a salute in everything but regulation. "Let's move out," Pike said to his team. I walked Marquez to the door. The cool evening air rushed in, smelling of sea salt and freedom. "You handled yourself well, Luna," Marquez said quietly before she got into her armored SUV. "Most people would have cracked." "I had training," I said. "Training helps," she said. "But character is what keeps you standing when the people you love are the ones holding the knife." She closed the door. The convoy of black SUVs pulled away, their taillights fading into the Georgia dusk. I turned back to the house. The grand foyer was empty. The silence was absolute. The party was over. The guests were gone. The secrets were out. I walked up the stairs to my room to pack my bag. I wasn't staying. I had a hearing to prepare for. I had a career to save. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what my family would say. They had fired their best shot, and I was still standing. But as I folded my clothes, I knew the hardest part was still to come. The hearing at the Pentagon wouldn't just be about my job. It would be the final autopsy of the Everly family. And I would be the one holding the scalpel. The conference room on the E-ring of the Pentagon does not have windows. It is a sealed box of brushed steel and soundproofed glass, designed to ensure that words spoken inside never leave without permission. The air is scrubbed, recycled, and kept at a constant 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It is a room designed to make powerful people feel small. My family sat on one side of the long, slate-gray table, Richard, Celeste, and Sloane. They looked stripped of their usual armor, without the backdrop of their estate, without the servants and the expensive furniture. They were just 3 frightened civilians in a room full of people who kill threats for a living. Grant was not with them. He was being held in a separate debriefing room down the hall, a fact that had made my father visibly twitchy since they arrived at 0800 hours. I sat on the opposite side of the table, flanked by Deputy Director Marquez and Colonel Pike. Special Agent Daniel Cross stood at the head of the table, standing behind a podium that bore the seal of the Department of Defense. "Let us begin," Cross said. His voice was not the apologetic mumble of the man who had visited our dining room. It was sharp, clear, and echoed slightly off the metal walls. "This is a formal adjudicative hearing regarding the security status of Dr. Luna Cruz. I am the presiding officer. I must remind all civilians present that you are currently within a sensitive compartmented information facility. Any attempt to record, transmit, or misrepresent the proceedings of this meeting is a violation of federal law. Every word spoken here has legal consequences." Richard shifted in his chair. He looked at me, then at Marquez. Is this really necessary? We signed the papers at the house. We admitted the mistake. You admitted to a domestic dispute, Marquez said, her hands folded on the table. Today, we are determining the extent of the counterintelligence damage. This is not a negotiation. Mr. Everly, it is an autopsy. Cross tapped a screen on the podium. The wall behind him illuminated with a complex network graph. In the center was my name. Radiating out from it were lines connecting to Celeste, Grant, the country club, the lobbyist Julian Thorne, and finally, the servers of Meridian Logistics. We have corroborated the timeline, Cross stated. The initial breach originated with Celeste Everly. The amplification was facilitated by Grant Keller. The exploitation was executed by Arthur Vane of Meridian Logistics. Cross looked at my mother. Mrs. Everly, you stated in your initial interview that your motivation was purely maternal. You claimed you wanted to protect your daughter from a perceived unstable lifestyle. Celeste straightened her spine, trying to summon the ghost of her socialite dignity. I did. A mother knows when her child is in trouble. I only wanted to help. Director Marquez, Cross said, please introduce Exhibit Delta. Marquez pressed a button. The room filled with the sound of my mother's voice from the recording Sloan had made. I have sent the letter. It is a masterpiece. Luna will be radioactive. We are going to break her. The recording played to its cruel conclusion. In the sterile silence of the Pentagon, the malice in her voice sounded even worse than it had in the kitchen. It sounded predatory. Celeste did not look at me. She stared at the table, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. That does not sound like protection, Mrs. Everly, Cross said. That sounds like a neutralization operation. I was angry, Celeste whispered. I felt disregarded. You felt irrelevant, Marquez corrected her. And to make yourself feel relevant, you threw a hand grenade into a classified environment. Cross pressed another button. Let us bring in Mr. Keller. The side door opened. 2 military police officers escorted Grant into the room. He was not wearing his suit jacket. His tie was gone. He looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days. They guided him to a single chair at the end of the table, separated from the rest of the family. Grant, Sloan gasped involuntarily. Grant did not look at her. He looked at the floor. Mr. Keller, Cross said, for the record, please state the nature of your relationship with Cerberus Global Solutions. Grant swallowed. His voice was a rasp. I hired them to conduct a background check. Did you instruct them to find legitimate derogatory information, or did you instruct them to fabricate it if none was found? Cross asked. Grant hesitated. He looked at Richard, then at Celeste. He saw the way they were looking at him like he was a disease. He realized in that moment that the Everly family protection did not extend to sons-in-law who got caught. I did what she told me to do, Grant blurted out, pointing a shaking finger at Celeste. Excuse me, Celeste snapped, her head whipping around. It was her idea, Grant shouted, his panic rising. She is the one who said Luna needed to be destroyed. She said Luna was arrogant. She told me to find anything drugs, men, debt. She said, I do not care if it is true. Just make it stick. I was just following her instructions. You coward, Celeste screamed. You came to me with the idea of the hackers. You said it was standard industry practice. You wanted her inheritance, Grant yelled back. You told me that if Luna stayed in she would eventually come back for her share of the trust. You wanted her disinherited so you could keep control of the board votes. Silence! Pike's voice boomed across the room. The bickering stopped instantly. The silence that followed was thick with disgust. I looked at Sloan. She was staring at her husband and her mother with a look of absolute revulsion. The curtain had been pulled back completely. There was no family loyalty here. There were only rats fighting over a sinking ship. Thank you, Mr. Keller, Marquez said coldly. Your statement has been noted. It confirms the conspiracy charge. She turned to Richard. My father was sitting very still, his face gray. Mr. Everly, Marquez said. Your wife and your son-in-law have just admitted to a conspiracy to defraud the government and harass a federal employee. Do you understand the impact this has on your business? I know, Richard croaked. The contracts are on hold. It is deeper than that, Marquez said. We have completed the threat assessment on Everly Atlantic Freight. Because your executive leadership, specifically your wife and your director of risk, demonstrated a willingness to manufacture false intelligence. Your company has been designated as an insider threat risk category 1. Richard closed his eyes. What does that mean? Sloane asked, speaking for the first time. Her voice was steady, surprising everyone. It means, Pike answered, that Everly Atlantic is permanently disqualified from holding a facility clearance. You can move bananas and furniture, Ms. Everly, but you will never move a single crate of government hardware again. The military contracts are gone, forever. Richard let out a low moan, like a wounded animal. That is 40% of the business. That is the end of us. It is the cost of doing business with people who do not respect the rules, Pike said. Sloane, Richard pleaded, turning to her. You have to fix this. You have to talk to them. Sloane stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at Grant, who was weeping silently. She looked at Celeste, who was glaring at the table. Then she looked at Richard. I cannot fix it, Dad, Sloane said, and I am not going to try. What? Richard asked. I listened to the recording again last night, Sloane said, and I listened to Grant just now. You people, you are monsters. You were willing to send Luna to prison, or worse, just to keep your little kingdom intact. Well, the kingdom is gone. You burned it down. She reached into her purse and pulled out a key card, her access pass to the Everly Atlantic headquarters. She placed it on the steel table. I resign, Sloane said. You cannot resign, Richard shouted. You are the successor. You are all I have left. Then you have nothing, Sloane said. She turned to me. I am done. Luna, I am done being the peacekeeper. I am done being the good daughter. You were right. They do not want a family. They want hostages. I looked at my sister. For the first time, I saw the strength that had been buried under years of compliance. Thank you. Sloane, I said. Cross cleared his throat. The resignation is noted. Now, we move to the resolution. He picked up a stack of documents. Mrs. Celeste Everly, Cross said, you will sign a permanent restrictive order. You are barred from contacting Dr. Cruz. You are barred from entering any federal facility. You are placed on the TSA selectee list for enhanced screening for all future travel, and you are hereby fined $250,000 for the misuse of government resources. Celeste gasped. 250, Richard. Richard did not move. He was staring at the key card Sloane had left on the table. Mr. Grant Keller, Cross continued, you are remanded to the custody of the U.S. Marshals pending your arraignment on charges of computer fraud and solicitation. Your cooperation today may be considered during sentencing, but I would not expect leniency. 2 MPs stepped forward and pulled Grant out of his chair. He didn't fight. He looked at Sloane one last time, but she was looking at the wall. And finally, Cross said, turning to me, Dr. Cruz? The room went quiet. Marquez and Pike turned to look at me. My family. What was left of it looked at me. The investigation has concluded, Cross said formally. The allegations against you have been proven false and malicious. Your clearance is fully reinstated. Your status is active. However, he paused. The exposure caused by this incident requires a change in your posture. Your cover identity has been compromised. We cannot put you back in the analyst pool. It is too dangerous. I understand, I said. We are offering you a transfer, Marquez said softly. Project Obsidian is moving its primary hub to a location in the Pacific Northwest. It is deep cover, new name, new legend, total separation. She looked at my parents. If you take this assignment, Luna, Marquez said, you disappear, completely, no holiday visits, no phone calls. As far as the world is concerned, Luna Cruz ceases to exist. I looked at Richard and Celeste. They were watching me with a mix of fear and desperate hope. They were hoping I would say no. They were hoping I would cling to the wreckage of the family. Luna, Celeste whispered, please, you cannot just leave us. I am not leaving you, I said calmly. I left you 10 years ago. You just refused to accept it. I stood up. I looked at the people who had raised me. I saw their vanity, their greed, and their profound smallness. I do not need you to understand what I do. I said to them, I never did. I just needed you to respect that I was doing it. But you couldn't do that. You couldn't stand the idea that I belonged to something bigger than you. I looked at Sloane. I will find a way to let you know I am safe, one day. Sloane nodded, tears streaming down her face. Go, be who you are. I turned to Marquez. I accept the assignment. Very good, Marquez said. Transport is waiting. Wait, Richard called out as I turned away. Luna, what do we tell people? What do we say happened to you? I stopped at the door. I looked back at my father one last time. Tell them the truth, I said. Tell them you investigated me. Tell them you found exactly what you were looking for. And tell them it cost you everything. I walked out of the room. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, sealing the Everly family in the silence of their own making. I walked down the long corridor of the Pentagon, my heels clicking on the polished floor. Colonel Pike and Agent Cross walked beside me. We didn't speak until we reached the exit. The sunlight outside was blindingly bright after the dim lighting of the skiff. The parking lot was filled with the bustle of people who had no idea that a family empire had just been executed in a conference room upstairs. Agent Cross stopped by the black SUV that was waiting to take me to the airfield. He opened the door for me. Dr. Cruz, he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small challenge coin. He pressed it into my hand. I looked at it. It was a unit coin from the task force in the Levant, the one from November 2019. We never forget, Cross said quietly. The code is safe. You are safe. Thank you. Daniel, I said. I got into the car. As the door closed and the engine hummed to life, I watched the Pentagon fade into the distance. I thought about my mother's gala, my father's shipping containers, and the golden cage they had tried to build for me. They would never understand. They lived in a world of appearances, where power was something you showed off at a dinner party. They didn't understand the power of silence. They didn't understand that the most important things in the world are the things you never talk about. My family might not see who I am. They might think I am a traitor, or a ghost, or a failure. But the system sees me. The people who matter see me. And the lives I save, even if they never know my name, are the only legacy I need. And that is enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to connect with you all. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.